On the 15th of November 2017, a man in Saudi Arabia bid by proxy in a Christie's auction room in New York. 19 minutes later, he had spent $450,300,000 on a single oil painting. It was and remains the most expensive artwork ever sold. Most of the people who saw it that night believed they were watching a lost Leonardo da Vinci come home. A great many of the world's leading Leonardo scholars believe they were watching something else entirely. How does a painting that was sold for 45 British pounds in 1958 become worth $450 million 60 years later? The answer is one of the most contested attribution stories in the history of Western art. It involves a wrecked panel, a sleeper buyer at a Louisiana estate sale, a New York restorer, a London exhibition that may have rushed its certainty, and a Russian oligarch, a Swiss Freeport, and a Saudi crown prince. Before we get to who owns it and who painted it, let's look at the painting itself. The Salvator Mundi, Latin for Savior of the World, is a small panel, roughly 26 by 18 inches. It shows a frontal Christ figure dressed in deep blue robes with embroidered gold trim. His right hand is raised in benediction. His left hand holds a transparent rock crystal sphere, an orb representing the cosmos. His hair falls in two long ringlets. His expression is neither sad nor smiling. It is the unsettling stillness that is the trademark of the most famous painter who ever lived. Leonardo da Vinci is believed to have painted a Salvator Mundi sometime around 1499 to 1510. We know this because the composition was famous in his own lifetime. Multiple workshop versions exist, at least 20 surviving copies and variants by his pupils and followers, scattered through museums and private collections from Naples to Detroit. But the prime version, the one Leonardo himself painted, was thought to be lost. There is also documentary evidence. An etching by Wenceslas Haller made in 1650 reproduces a Salvator Mundi composition and is inscribed with Leonardo's name. It also appears in the 1649 inventory of King Charles I of England, who collected Italian masters voraciously before his execution. After Charles was beheaded, his collection was dispersed by the Commonwealth. The painting passes briefly into Cromwell-era sales, then into the collection of the Duke of Buckingham. Then it vanishes from the historical record for almost 200 years. Fast forward to 1900. A British collector named Sir Frederick Cook acquires a beat-up Salvator Mundi from a London dealer. The painting is heavily overpainted. Some past owner has crudely repainted Christ's face, hair, and beard with thick, dark, almost cartoonish strokes. Cook is told it is a workshop copy by Bernardino Luini, one of Leonardo's followers. He pays a modest price. In 1958, Cook's descendants put the painting up for auction at Sotheby's. The catalog still lists it as a Luini. It sells for £45. £45 in today's money, less than $1,500. The painting then disappears again into private American hands, into estate sales, into the long, quiet limbo where forgotten paintings live. By the early 2000s, it has surfaced in a Louisiana estate. In 2005, two American art dealers, Robert Simon and Alexander Parrish, spot it in a New Orleans regional auction. They believe the surface is so badly damaged and the painting so dirty that nobody really knows what is underneath it. They buy it as a long-shot speculation. They paid just over $1,000. From $1,000 to $450 million is a multiple of roughly 450,000 times. That is the largest known return on a single artwork acquisition in recorded history. Simon and Parrish take the panel to a New York restorer named Diane Modestini. Modestini is one of the most respected old master conservators in the world, with deep credentials at the Crest Foundation and decades of experience restoring damaged Italian panel paintings. What Modestini finds beneath the layers of overpaint and yellowed varnish becomes the heart of the entire controversy. As she removes the crude later repaints, she reports that she begins to see what she believes are passages painted by an artist of extraordinary refinement. The hand holding the crystal orb, the blessing hand, the tightly curled ringlets of hair, the subtle modeling of the lips, with that almost imperceptible asymmetry that is a Leonardo signature. The painting she becomes convinced is not a workshop copy at all. It is the prime version, the original, the lost Leonardo, but there is a problem. The panel itself has been catastrophically damaged at some point in its history, probably in the 18th or 19th century. It cracked vertically down the center of Christ's face. Significant portions of the original paint surface, particularly across the face, are missing. Modestini has to in-paint those losses herself. This is a normal part of restoration, but for an attribution claim of this magnitude, it matters enormously. How much of the face we now see is Leonardo, and how much of it is Modestini? This is the question that will dog the painting for the next 15 years, and it is the question that, to this day, has no agreed answer. In 2008, Simon and Parrish arranged for the cleaned painting to be examined privately by a small group of Leonardo specialists at the National Gallery in London. 5 scholars are invited: Carmen Bambach of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Pietro Morani, Maria Teresa Fiorio, Martin Kemp of Oxford, and David Allen Brown of the National Gallery in Washington. The accounts of that meeting vary depending on who tells the story. Some scholars present came away convinced it was an autograph Leonardo. Others were less certain, but the National Gallery moves forward. In 2011, it includes the Salvator Mundi as a fully attributed Leonardo da Vinci in its blockbuster exhibition. Leonardo da Vinci, painter at the court of Milan. That inclusion is, in art market terms, an institutional baptism. It transforms the panel from a contested attribution into a publicly endorsed Leonardo, but here is what makes this story unusual. The National Gallery never published a comprehensive technical study of the painting. The inclusion in the exhibition catalog was framed as Leonardo, but the institution did not subject the attribution to the kind of rigorous, peer-reviewed scientific publication that a discovery of this magnitude would normally demand. Carmen Bambach, one of the world's foremost Leonardo drawing specialists, later went on the public record saying she believed the painting was largely by Leonardo's pupil Giovanni Antonio Boltraffio, with possibly some passages by the master himself. Other scholars have argued more bluntly that it is a workshop production, painted in Leonardo's studio under his supervision, but not by his hand. Frank Zollner, the German Leonardo scholar who edits the standard catalog Raison, has consistently described the painting as a workshop product retouched by Leonardo, not a fully autographed work. What happens next is where art history collides with international finance, sanctions law, and the murkier corners of the global art market. In 2013, the painting is sold by Simon and Parrish through a Swiss intermediary named Yves Bouvier to the Russian billionaire Dmitry Rybolovlev for $127.5 million. Bouvier, in turn, had bought the painting from Simon and Parrish for about $80 million. Bouvier pocketed the difference. Rybolovlev later sued Bouvier for fraud, claiming Bouvier had concealed the actual purchase price from him while charging an enormous markup. That litigation eventually settled. Then in 2017, Rybolovlev consigns the painting to Christie's. Christie's makes the unusual decision to sell the painting not in an old master sale, where it would be examined by specialist collectors and curators in that field, but in a post-war and contemporary art sale. That decision is strategic. The post-war contemporary buyer base is wealthier, more impulsive, and less likely to be deeply versed in Renaissance attribution debates. Christie's also runs a remarkable global marketing campaign. The painting is shipped to Hong Kong, San Francisco, and London for preview viewings, drawing crowds that line up for hours. The buyer in 2017 is initially reported as a relatively obscure Saudi prince named Bader bin Abdullah. Subsequent reporting by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal indicated that Bader was acting as a proxy for the actual buyer, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. The painting's whereabouts since the 2017 sale have not been confirmed publicly. It is widely believed to have been at one point on the Saudi-owned superyacht Serene. It is also rumored to be held in storage in either Saudi Arabia or a Swiss free port. In late 2017, the Louvre Abu Dhabi announced it would display the painting. Then, without explanation, the announcement was withdrawn. 3 weeks before the planned unveiling, the museum quietly canceled. The Louvre in Paris had planned to include the Salvator Mundi in its 2019 blockbuster Leonardo retrospective, the largest gathering of Leonardo paintings ever assembled, marking the 500th anniversary of his death. The painting did not appear. French researchers had reportedly examined the painting and prepared a technical analysis, the most extensive scientific study to date, according to subsequent reporting and a leaked draft. The Louvre scientists concluded the panel had been painted in Leonardo's workshop with some contributions from the master himself, but they were not prepared to call it a fully autographed Leonardo when the Saudi side reportedly refused to allow the painting to be displayed under the Louvre's preferred attribution language. The loan fell through. Set aside the money and the politics for a moment. What does the physical evidence say? Infrared reflectography of the panel reveals an underdrawing, and the underdrawing shows changes the artist made during the planning of the composition. The most famous of these is a so-called pentimento on the blessing hand. The thumb was initially positioned differently and then repainted. That is significant. A copyist normally reproduces a finished composition. A pentimento, a visible revision, usually indicates the artist was working out the composition for the first time, not copying. That argues for an original. On the other hand, the orb Leonardo was obsessively interested in optics, geometry, and the physics of light through transparent materials. He filled notebooks with studies of how light refracts through crystal, water, and glass. A transparent glass or crystal sphere held in front of a robed figure would normally produce an inverted, magnified, or distorted image of the robe behind it. In the Salvator Mundi, the orb shows no such optical distortion. The robe behind it appears unaltered through the glass. For a painter who understood optics as deeply as Leonardo did, that has struck some critics as implausible. The counterargument is that Leonardo may have painted the orb as a hollow rock crystal sphere, which would not refract in the same way, or that he made a deliberate iconographic choice to keep Christ's body visually intact. Both explanations are possible. Neither is conclusive. The walnut panel itself has been dendrochronologically dated. The wood is consistent with Leonardo's known practice of painting on walnut panels in the early 16th century. The pigments are period appropriate. The technique of layered glazes, particularly in the modeling of the hair and the robes, is consistent with Leonardo's late practice. None of this proves Leonardo painted it. All of it is consistent with the painting having been produced in Leonardo's workshop, which housed numerous talented pupils, Boltraffio, Salai, Marco Degano, Francesco Melzi, who painted in styles closely modeled on the master. Here is, as best as I can summarize, the state of expert opinion in 2026. A minority of scholars, including Martin Kemp of Oxford, Luke Sisson, formerly of the National Gallery, and Diane Modestini herself, maintain that the painting is substantially by Leonardo's hand. A second group, perhaps the largest, holds that it is a workshop painting with possibly some passages by Leonardo, but not fully autographed. A third group, smaller but vocal, including Carmen Bambach and Matthew Landrus, argues that the principal hand is one of the workshop pupils, most likely Boltraffio, perhaps with minor touches by Leonardo. No serious scholar argues it is a later forgery or pastiche. The painting was produced in or near Leonardo's workshop around 1500. The question is exactly whose brush touched the panel, and where, my own view, for what it is worth, the strongest reading of the available evidence is that this is a workshop painting supervised by Leonardo with significant contributions from the master himself in certain passages, probably the hands and the hair, but not a fully autographed picture in the way that the Mona Lisa or the Virgin of the Rocks are autographed pictures. That is not a $450 million reading. That is a $30 or $50 million reading. The gap between those two numbers is the gap between scholarship and the market. The Salvator Mundi story is not really about a painting. It is about how the modern art market manufactures certainty out of doubt. A panel that scholars cannot agree on becomes, through a single institutional endorsement and a brilliant marketing campaign, the most expensive object ever sold. It is then locked away from the public, possibly on a yacht, and is not displayed in the one museum exhibition that would have allowed scholars to finally examine it together in 2019. If the painting is a fully autographed Leonardo, it is one of perhaps 20 surviving works by the most consequential painter in Western art. If it is a workshop product, it is one of many, and $450 million was paid for a beautiful, damaged, partially restored, partially unpainted icon of art market hubris. The truth is probably somewhere in between, in the painting. Wherever it is right now, knows the answer. The rest of us will go on arguing